Hi everyone. I'm James Fernie-Huff, the Politico's Energy, Climate, Sustainability editor. Well, I thought that was a really interesting and quite frank interview with Commissioner Hoekstra, where he very aptly touched on the elephant in the room, which is the US, and its quite dramatic reversal of its position on climate change from the Joe Biden presidency. So I'm excited now to close today's program with a short chat with my counterpart in the US, Deborah Kahn, who's over there. Hi, Deborah.
Hi, James.
So we're gonna have a chat about how things look at the other side of the Atlantic. Since Donald Trump returned to office, the EU and the US have been on different planets when it comes to climate and energy policy. The EU continues to accept the science of climate change and remains committed to treaties like the Paris Agreement, while the Trump administration has got out of the Paris Treaty, is banning wind farms, taking away EV subsidies, and trying to open up new oil and gas projects. It's a really dramatic shift, and I'm just really curious to know how it's going down in the US. How are you dealing with this kind of situation?
Well, thanks for having me. I'll say Trump's campaign to reverse Biden-era green reforms is going quite effectively. If you're not in favor of them, you'd be happy with the way that Trump is performing. Broadly, most tax credits for renewable energy are now significantly curtailed. He's negotiated deals with several offshore wind companies to cancel their leases, pursue natural gas projects instead, and more broadly is slowing down wind project permitting. It's unclear, I'd say, how popular it is with the general public, but it isn't seeing really any political pushback because Democrats are so on the back foot politically in general, and there's very little differentiation as to why. Climate policies are so tangled up in the whole question of why Democrats lost so badly in 2024, and Democrats are still kind of undergoing a post-mortem of their mistakes, and so there's a rush to the right, where we see governors in particular emphasizing affordability. In many cases, they're adopting the frame that climate policies raise energy prices. And then at the same time, there's a debate on the left over whether subsidies are in fact needed anymore. There's a line of argument that they're now able to compete on their own and renewable, but still, I will say, like, renewable energy is still the fastest growing form of energy in the US, despite all this.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That's something that doesn't perhaps make it through. I mean, you mentioned there that the climate policy was all wrapped up in why the Democrats lost. What was that about? What are they worried about by talking about climate?
I mean, it's more that it's kind of like there's this soul searching going on. Like during the Biden administration, environmental groups went to the left on almost everything. And there was a big campaign where a bunch of different concerns on the left kind of got wrapped up into the campaign. Like the war in Gaza became one of the main things that environmental groups started activating on. And so it's more like there's this whole kind of political ball of wax now where they're not sure what is going to be the thing that will help them break out. And then given the war and given energy prices, I mean, I'd say the through line here, the thing that's most important to keep in mind about US politics is that people in the US expect cheap energy prices, where Europe does not quite to the same extent. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as a result, has less of that mentality where it's price above
In
all.
Europe, it's sort of, sorry, I think in Europe it's a matter of, I think Europeans are just used to high energy prices. That's probably more the thing. But sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, as a Californian, it's more like that in California too. We expect and to some extent accept high energy prices, whereas the rest of the country is not quite like that, and it becomes a political problem. And then Democrats are on the back foot when they're trying to talk about climate policies.
So, I mean, one of the things in the big story in recent months has been the war in Iran, which was started by the US and Israel, but feels like it's really impacted, first of all, Asia, and then Europe, and then the US. In Europe, it's really started a conversation all about we don't have any fossil fuels of our own. We are vulnerable. We need to electrify. We need to go renewable. So the conversation about shifting to renewable has gone from being a climate conversation to being one about energy security. So I'm just curious, has it changed the debate in the US, and if so, how, the Iran war?
I mean, if the Democratic Party were in charge, it would be a lot different, right? So there wouldn't be, I mean, maybe there wouldn't be a war, there wouldn't be all of this talk. So it hasn't really resonated the same way in the U.S. It hasn't advanced any kind of climate or renewables talk. There's a wing of the Democratic Party that says that renewables would in fact protect us from oil price shocks, but that's clearly not the dominant wing right now. It has shifted the energy debate to the impact of the war specifically on oil prices, and then the debate becomes how to bring those down, either by opening the Strait of Hormuz or also by drilling more, which we haven't seen a lot of domestically. It's pretty odd though, because there hasn't been huge consumer reaction to price rises. Driving is continuing. We haven't seen demand destruction or anything, but there's also a debate about why prices aren't higher than they are. The question's not really why oil is so high at like $92 a barrel. It's more, why isn't it 130? There's a structural deficit here, and it's interesting how consumers are not really reacting super strongly.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know if you could hear from where you were now, but we just had a really interesting interview with the EU's climate chief and he spoke quite frankly about the role the US has played in international climate negotiations. I wrote down some of the things he said. He said it's been quite damaging to trust. He spoke very kind of warmly of the role that John Kerry, Joe Biden's climate chief, played in international negotiations, and now he says they don't want to participate. He was saying that he thinks it's in the interests of the US to participate, and it's doing itself some damage. I just wonder, what role do you see? I mean, Donald Trump won't be president forever, and there may well, in 2.5 years, be a Democrat in the White House. Do you see the US coming back to international climate negotiations?
Yes. If Democrats retake the White House, they would definitely revive climate talk. I mean, they're not going to say it now because we're in this era of inflation and energy affordability. But, as I said, renewable energy is still the fastest growing form of energy in the US. Even with the cancellation of manufacturing that's happened since the rollback of incentives, there is a business case. Energy storage is still growing fast. Even though Trump rolled back EV incentives, automaker makers like Ford are trying to become more of a battery company. They just last month launched Ford Energy, aimed at energy storage. So there are some bright policy spots still on renewable energy. Um, I mean, writ large, it's worth noting that in the US, we've gone from, so under Obama, we had actual regulatory climate policies that were aimed at emissions reductions. Under Biden, we had incentives, lots of money. Neither of those have proved politically sustainable across political administrations. And so I do think, depending on how renewable energy installations go, there will be a robust debate at some point among Democrats about whether we're in a post-subsidy environment. But yes, I do expect Democrats to return to the climate table at some point. But I will also point out, it's also important to keep in mind oil production was at record highs under the Biden administration as well. So it's been all of the above for a long time now, and the messaging is now all of the above, except for certain renewables. But it's likely a Democratic administration would go back to all of the above.
It sounds like to what extent would you say that the noise, the drill baby drill versus the Inflation Reduction Act bonanza of clean energy subsidies, that, how much of that was rhetoric and how much is the reality actually that different under Donald Trump than it was under Joe Biden?
Um, I would say it's having a real chilling effect. I mean, the investments are still happening in some cases, but his rhetoric is in fact bleeding into the policy environment and then the investment environment for sure, especially in the wind sector and the solar sector. So I'd say it's both. It's rhetorical and it's substantive.
Just finally, I know when we've had our meetings, our sort of cross transatlantic editorial meetings, you've talked a lot about AI, and this is a kind of energy wildcard that suddenly appeared. These data centers are just unbelievably energy intensive and require vast amounts of electricity, and the rate at which they're being built in the US is pretty astounding. What's the big story there that you're following?
I mean, it's kind of the same. It's interesting, as much as there is a split screen in Europe and the U.S. On data centers, it's interesting because while it does seem to be more of an environmental issue that people are raising in the EU, it's much more. It's almost overwhelmingly about price sensitivity in the U.S. on a bipartisan basis. Among Democrats, you'll definitely see environmental opposition, but it's entirely a price question on the Republican side. So, broadly, I think it's the same as in the EU. This is, the first time in 20 years that electricity demand is rising. So there's the potential for data centers to create demand to fund the investment in transmission and the grid that's been long needed. But as someone I think put it at the summit earlier, it's also a bit of a crisis in slow motion. It's hugely inflamed the affordability debate. There's a backlash going on. Governors are backtracking on the tax incentives. That's what's happening right now. Last week, I think like 5 governors of both parties unveiled new AI and data center platforms, and in some cases, they proposed rolling back tax incentives. So the question of who will pay is really the story that we're watching right now. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is supposed to come out with new rules this month governing how data centers can connect to the grid. So that's, whether their impact over the medium term does drive up prices, as they're being blamed for, is a question for utilities and regulators and the tech sector.
And you said that the environmental side of it isn't really taken into account. Is there, because these things have a very, they need to be powered at the same rate constantly. So, I mean, are they sort of building new gas plants? What's powering these things? Is it changing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're building new gas plants. That is, I mean, yes, that's like a huge question. I think it'll be particularly interesting to see what does emerge as the main. I think it'll be gas, but it'll be particularly interesting to see what the tech industry lands upon as potential power for these centers, because I think of them as more kind of ideologically agnostic and more economically, just kind of cold, hard economically driven. So it'll be really interesting to see if they do gravitate towards renewables at all.
Okay. I mean, it's been a hell of a roller coaster the last sort of year and a half of the Trump presidency. Iran seems to have quieted things down a bit. At least that's the view over here. Is that the view from where you are, or are there any sort of other big energy things on the horizon that you're looking out for?
I mean, truly, Iran is the huge story. We were very interested to see what's going to happen on that. I'll say it's kind of remarkable how Trump has been able to kind of jawbone energy prices based on what he says about the war. He'll be like, "Oh, it's gonna, we're reaching a deal, and markets will drop like $10." It's kind of amazing. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, said that oil markets were getting into balance, even though we have a huge structural imbalance. So this difference between what they say and what the markets do, like this question of why the markets are not responding quite as fervently to this supply crunch that we're seeing is the question. And then for us, then the question is, how does this translate to the driving season and then to the midterms in November? If he can bring the war to a close and if he can get prices back under control. Analysts are saying it'll still take 2 months until the Strait reopens. Past the time the Strait reopens, that oil prices will get back to normal. So that's kind of the midterms is kind of the next thing that we're looking at.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're out of time, but thanks so much. It was really great to chat, and yeah, we'll be watching what happens in the midterms too with a lot of interest. So great to have you. Thanks.
Thanks, James.